Hey everyone, welcome back to lunch. Hope you all have a good time so far. And right now, our next speaker is Fernando, Montenegro, and it's going to be great.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay? Thank you very much for having me again. I probably packed a little bit too much content into a time slot, so I'll keep moving. If you were here yesterday, this was my About Me introduction, and I mentioned yesterday that there's a social psychologist called Robert Cialdini. And what I mentioned yesterday, I didn't mention that, is that he works on the psychology of persuasion, and go read it up, it's really interesting. But the one reason that every speaker, or most speakers, have an About Me slide is based on that. Right? So that's the interesting tidbit for you for today. The little bit about me is that I've been in industry for a while, and I like to say that my gray hair means that my now old enough to drink. And I'm a very curious guy. I like economics, I like psychology, I like investing. And this presentation came about based on the fact that people talk to us about careers and whatnot all the time. Does anybody remember this movie? That's a tough one. Any takers? This is that wonderful gem in movie making called Pearl Harbor, from Michael Bay, 2000 and whatever. And this is Alec Baldwin giving a speech about his, for fighters who are about to go do a very serious mission. And he makes a comment about, oh, I'm X years old. I'm an old man. I'm X plus 1 now. So this is part of the reason why I'm doing this. And the other thing is this. You may have seen this pyramid of, it's a joke lying around on the internet, the pyramid of Silicon Valley needs and the kind of stuff you do in your career. And the last one is you write a blog post with life advice. I'm not writing a blog post. And to some extent, I apologize because some of this talk is motherhood and apple pie. But some of it is not, right? And I'm hoping that what I went through may help people do some of their own career choices as they move along. I like to frame career in terms of strategy. We always talk about strategy, but we don't really go into it too much. Who here is familiar with the work of Simon Wardley, if anybody? Simon Wardley, perfect. So, Wolf, go back to sleep. Or go to sleep. Simon Wardley is a former CIO and a researcher, and he talks about strategy, and I really recommend you look it up. There's a fantastic presentation he did at Google Next this year about crossing the river by feeling the stones. I highly, highly recommend it. And he discusses strategy, and the way that he discusses strategy incorporates Sun Tzu, the principles that Sun Tzu espoused, as well as some of the stuff from, yes, and I apologize for the Sun Tzu references, but this one is actually good. And he talks about John Boyd's OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, and act. So my theory, my suggestion is that we should look at our careers from a strategic perspective. And what John Boyd and what Simon Wardley talks about is that you should really consider that, and this is something that you do repeated. You update your beliefs and you keep moving on. It's almost like a Bayesian thing. In that there are 5 distinct phases for analyzing strategy. The first one is your purpose. Why is it that you're doing what you're doing? What is it that you want to achieve? The second one is analyzing the landscape. Where is it that you are situated? What's going, or what is the environment you're settled in? Then climate, which means what are the things affecting that environment? Later there is doctrine, which is what are the good recommended practices to behave on that environment? And then finally you have leadership, which is choosing to do something about it. So I like to frame, how I frame my career choices and how I like to frame things is in the context of this. So yes, it is Sun Tzu, but it is applied Sun Tzu. Right? So the first one is purpose. And purpose is the one thing that I cannot help you with. You have to find your own. And this is one of those things where there's variations of this chart on the internet floating around. How you choose to do, what are you doing with your career? What do you want to do? What do you want to get out of your career? I can't help you, right? But what I can say is that understanding the purpose of what your career is absolutely fundamental, because that's going to drive what you're going to endure. Which leads me to another interesting point, is what people always ask, what is it that you want? What do you want to achieve? And I don't like that question as much as I like the question, what pain do you want to endure? There's a fantastic book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F, and I'm not doing it on video, about things. And he talks about what is the pain that you want to endure, right? Because that's going to drive a lot of what you are going to be doing. That's enough about purpose. Let's talk about landscape for a second. So what is that we are situated on? And the one lots of words slide is that I would like us to understand that our careers are a business. You are running your own business. And one of the realizations I had was many years ago, I came across this wonderful book called The Personal. I'm not sure if anybody here has heard about it. Perfect. And I'll summarize, and he summarizes the book, every successful business creates something that people want at a price they're willing to pay in a way, and then you deliver that and you earn money from doing it. I don't care if you're a non-profit. I don't care if you're an employee. I don't care if you're a contractor, if you're a CEO. This is what you run a business. And summarizing it, we talk about value creation. So you have to create whatever it is the value you're going to deliver. You have to understand the demand for that value. Once you understand the demand for that value, then you are going to conduct a transaction for that good, which is your service. Then you're going to have to deliver that value. And finally, you have to do it in a way that is profitable for your continued scenario. So this is one of the key things, one of the key takeaways is your career is a business. Please treat it as such. Who here is familiar with the work of the Accidental Empires that Robert Cringely wrote in 1993, I believe it was? So he came up with the definition of pioneers, settlers, and town planners. And this is more about your aptitude. You have to understand who you are. Among us, there are people in this industry who are pioneers. They thrive on the unknown, and they'll create wonderful products, or they'll create wonderful concepts that we're going to apply. There are people who are town planners. They'll take something that already exists, and they're going to be fantastic at industrializing that concept and then optimizing the hell out of it. And in between that, we have settlers, who are people who are going to take the concepts that the pioneers created and productize it and get it into the hands of many, many people. All of us fall on this spectrum somewhere. And I think it is fundamental from a landscape perspective for you to understand where you fall as well. Now, this chart here, it's also the first introduction, if you haven't, of what Simon Wardley calls, we call it a Wardley map. Right, which is basically a value chain map of the value that you are providing to your customer. And the example, ignore this example here for a second, but what I want to highlight is that a value map has, you have what value are you providing to your customer? The customer is the top of the chain. And then you break down the kind of what it is that you're doing for your customer. And then you break it down into, is it something that is absolutely brand new? Is it something that we can custom build? Is it something that it's a product? Or is it something that's a commodity? Again, I highly recommend you check out the Google Next presentation that Simon Wardley did. It's absolutely time. So, pioneers, settlers, and town planners. One thing I try to do here is, just as an example, I try to map out what my former role as a sales engineer would look like under a map. So here I have, what does a sales engineer do? Well, they support sales. Then They also create content, and they may potentially mentor people. Well, once they mentor people, what do you need to do to mentor people? Well, you need knowledge, you need some social skills, and you need some organizational skills to work, to understand what it is, to work in your organization properly. Well, to get organizational skills, you need time management and office skills, right? So, more interestingly, what I try to build out here is that your value chain maps across this evolution axis, and you can understand, if you look at your own career, at your own roles, you can try to understand, okay, the work that I need to do, as a sales engineer, I need to understand the sales methodologies that my company has. Well, the sales methodology, if I am a genius in the sales methodology, that's fine, but that, in my interpretation, it's more of a commodity. Like, yes, it's fine that I understand the sales methodology, but realistically, perhaps I should spend my time getting product knowledge, or perhaps I should spend my time, and I put the word in quotes, thought leadership, right? I will not use the words in the resume, but that's what it means, because that is more unique. So my suggestion is, as you are navigating your career, understand where the role that you have fits into this model, because this is going to help you understand what it is that you should focus on as a professional. Yesterday, someone mentioned now discover your strengths or the strengths finder. That was a pivotal, that was a turning point in my career. I read that book back in 2005, and it changed my life. Not this particular book, but the versions before. I highly, highly recommend it. And while I'm here talking about it, I should remind everyone of the recent XKCD cartoon about survivorship bias, right? Let's not that just because I'm up here talking, that doesn't mean that this is the be-all and end-all. It just means that, hey, it worked for me. Okay? Anyway, so that is the thing about the Strengths Finder that I found particularly helpful is that at the time I was doing professional services and I was really enjoying some of it, but not enjoying the rest. And Strengths Finder helped me understand that my own personal profile was a little different, and that's when I moved over into sales engineering. So I highly recommend people understand what it is how they are built up. So we talked about landscape. Let's talk about climate. Ignore the actual content of the chart. What I want you to highlight is that from a widely chart perspective, there is constant evolution. So the way you map that, the way you demonstrate that in a map is that, remember this chart? All of these things, they are evolving towards commodity. So that is one of the key features in our industry. Things evolve and they move towards commoditization. The fact that you know how to do PowerPoint slides may have been a great thing. They were a great thing 15 years ago, 20 years ago when I helped my mom build her own slides for her presentations. They are not that anymore. By the same token, learning TCP/IP is really interesting, but trust me, it's evolving towards commoditization. So that is one of the climates that affects us, is this change towards evolution. What else is affecting? What other climatic changes are affecting our industry? This is the shared responsibility model as depicted by Amazon, right? As everything moves to the cloud, the role of security is fundamentally changing. Right? No longer are we actually responsible for running everything. What ends up happening is that you have your cloud service provider taking over the basic of the configuration, the basic of the environment, and your application teams handling the layer 7 stuff and the application security stuff. What is the role for security then? I invite you to consider that in the context of your own roles. Right? Perhaps rather than understand the ins and outs of packet filtering, perhaps you should take a look at how IAM integrates into AWS or Azure or Google or what have you. The other change that's been happening is DevOps, right? And we had a couple of fantastic presentations about DevOps here. One of the things about DevOps is that there's this notion that quality should shift left, right? And what this means is that the tests for quality should be shifting further and further towards where code is actually being written. Well, the same thing is happening for security. Security is and should be shifting left. So that is a climatic pattern into what's happening to us. And one more thing I wanted to call out is that there's a fantastic blog post, a couple of blog posts actually by Rich Mogul from Securosis. He published earlier this year called Tidal Forces, when he talks about the forces that are affecting enterprise security. I'm kind of stealing his thunder here, but fundamentally, he talks about how endpoints are becoming more secure, but at the same time, less open. It's more difficult to get stuff into an endpoint. Your back office applications are all being SaaSified, if that's a word, and infrastructure as a service is your new data center. So, thinking back strategically, how does that affect your own career? So how do you navigate those changes, right? I'm not saying I have all the answers. I'm just introducing the topics and hopefully a framework for you to analyze it yourselves, okay? Next up is doctrine. And doctrine is what it is that you should be doing. Or what are the recommended practices. I'm not going to read all of them here. I'll share the slides, of course. And I suggest, again, you look up Simon Wardley's work. But these are the things that, in general, you should be doing anyway. One of those things is you should focus on your user needs. Well, who is your user? Well, it's the company who employs you. It's the customer who buys from you if you're a business. It's your principal, right? You should learn by playing the game, which means you should frame your decisions and your actions based on a framework such as the one I'm presenting here. You should iterate what it is that you're doing. Anyway, there's quite a few here. Look up the slides later. One thing I wanted to share from a personal experience is how do I evaluate, and this falls into the doctrine thing, is how do I evaluate an opportunity? I've been contacted, as many of you have, by recruiters left and right. I work, so you evaluate your own job. And actually, this is how I got started with the idea for doing this presentation, is how do I consider any opportunity? Well, I look at 5 things. Number one is, how does it fit into the broader arc of whatever career that you have, right? You have your purpose, remember? How does this particular opportunity fit? It may be a perfect fit. It may be kind of a sideways move, maybe a little more opportunistic. Keep that in mind. Second, as we are, and I am a technologist, so what about the technology? I was in sales engineering, and I emphasize that you cannot represent a product that you don't believe in. You cannot effectively deliver a good product or a good sales pitch, or if you are not in sales, you cannot effectively deliver a good solution if you're not committed to your product, right? So it's a very important point as well. Then projects and customers. Some people thrive in the SMB space. Some others prefer enterprise. Some prefer government. Some prefer to be outside of technology, being policy. What kind of project are you involved in? What kind of project are you asked to be involved in? Then we have the type of people that you're going to work with. One of the things I loved about this session, this conference as well as Converge, is we've been talking a lot about culture, and I think that's fundamental. I'm absolutely in awe of Jim Beachy from his presentation this morning on diversity and communication and culture. You want to be able to understand where it is that you're walking into. And then finally, I put everything else. I put the work-life balance, I put the compensation, I put the training opportunities. So this is my framework. If you come to me, hey, Fernando, I have a job for you, or would you like to consider this job? This is how I'm going to analyze things, right? Now, what other lessons from a doctrine perspective have I learned? I've learned this, know thyself, right? This is one of those things, the advice I'm giving you here worked very well for me, may not be the same for you. And take the time to understand yourself. If you think of yourself as a business, Analyze your own business, what it is that you're doing. I found there's tremendous value in being able to develop the passion and develop the skill of focusing, right? If you can deliver focused work, even if it's for a few hours a day, right? It allows you to be that much more productive. I swear by the Pomodoro technique. If people are not familiar with it, I highly recommend you look it up. Adapting to a commute is the hardest thing if you're considering roles. I was having a conversation over lunch and someone mentioned that a traffic jam for him is tripping over his kids' toys, right? I love that because it doesn't mean that you're not going to take long commute roles, but understand this. You can adapt to an increase in salary, right? It's called hedonistic adaptation, right? You can adapt to an increase in salary. It's much harder to adapt to an increased commute. Also, travel is fun, and I've had my share of travel, but travel is fun to a point, right? I hate missing important family activities, right? Yes, there is a value to being able to go and do things, and I love running into friends, making new friends on conferences and whatnot, but understand this, it's not the glory life that you expect it to be, right? Other things that I've learned, organizations are courts. There is politics in every organization. Don't wish that you were going to, I wish there were no politics. Yeah, good luck with that, right? Startups, large companies, in between, everything. I'm pontificating a little too much, I'm running out of time. So I want to call out a couple other things. Analyze your career. You have approximately 10,000 days in your career, beginning to end, give or take. Make them count, right? It's a little depressing sometimes when you see that you may have gone past that midpoint or whatnot, but you know what? I'll do the best I can with them. And then finally, if you're asked to join a startup, for example, I love the startup space, but there is what I call this tall to ride phenomenon. You have to be able to, for any opportunity, you have to be able to take that opportunity knowing that you can manage the downside, right? Are you able to live, if you have, for example, a humongous mortgage and you have family obligations that take a lot of your time, be careful about the kind of commitments you make at work, and vice versa, right? So that's the pontification doctrine piece. On the leadership side, again, going back to that methodology, we have to make choices, and making the choices have to be done in the context of your own purpose. So I can't really tell you what to do. What I will say this, understand this strategy framework, right? Think of your career in the context of a strategy. And then iterate, right? Keep refining it. When I consider my own choices for a career, I look at, you think about it every single day. Going back to that model I have, the 5 factors I have there, I'm okay if 1 or 2 of those are off for a period of time, right? That's okay. Maybe you have a project that's going to, pardon the expression, suck for 6 months. That's fine, right? But if it's something chronic, if something hopeless, then yes, by all means consider moving. Just moving quickly. I really recommend people develop and maintain what I call a craftsman mindset, which is the notion that work on your craft, study, know yourself and know where you have to fix. There were fantastic comments throughout the past couple of days around developing around your strengths, around covering your weaknesses. That all applies. Same thing with develop and grow career capital. Find something that you do that is considered valuable, but is also considered unique enough. Emphasize the deep work enough. Learn how to shut things off. Like if I actually have to sit down and write content, you will not find me on Twitter. You will not find me on Facebook. You will not find me. My phone will be off and will be off to the side. Right? I can do that for 25 minutes, which is a Pomodoro slice. Right? And then those things build up. That's how this presentation got built. This presentation was built over about maybe 8 or 9 Pomodoro slices. Right? And Some of you may know that I love economics. I talk about information asymmetry a lot. In general, work to reduce the information asymmetry about your career. Information asymmetry is people can't evaluate what it is that you do. So they can't evaluate the value of what you do. So work to clear that off. Participate in your community. Do your networking. Work on your relationships. Go play in your CTFs. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of CTF, but I understand the value for some people, right? Go do that. As for the certification versus degree thing, I was going to post a chart here about the number of people who have degrees and not have degrees. I'll say this. It's much easier if you have a certification, if you have a degree. Do with that what you will. Okay? I'm not saying it's not doable, but just do with that what you will. So let's wrap up. We talked about the Simon Wardley's strategic overview, what is your purpose? Where it is that you're doing? What is affecting your landscape? What are the good things you should normally do in any scenario? And what are you going to do about it? Observe, orient, decide, and act. Okay? I'll wrap up by saying that value creation, customer demand, transactions, value delivery, and profit sufficiency. Okay? If you want further resources, I really enjoyed reading the Personal MBA. I suggest you take a look at that. So Good They Can't Ignore You from Cal Newport is probably one of my favorite books. But that's where you get the notion of career capital and developing and learning the practices of deep work and so on. I absolutely loved Scott Adams' book because he talks about never mind politics and whatnot, he talks about the benefit of process as opposed to goals. The focus on having a good routine, not on a long-term goal. We can ask me more about it later. I've become kind of a Stoic over time. So if you're interested in Stoic philosophy, The Obstacle is the Way is a very, very good introduction. Basically means embrace the obstacle you're facing, and it is through that you're going to persevere and that you're going to grow. I mentioned, of course, Simon Wardley and the Thick-Rosas Tidal Forces paper. I'm done. On that happy note, I'll be around for questions. Thank you. Questions, comments, frozen or rotten fruit thrown at me or anything? No? We're good? Thank you very much, everybody.